And if you look at the Pew study on India in 2021, you'll see that Indians, well, for a start, all of them identify with a caste, so you can't blame it on upper caste Hindus. All of them, all of the religions. Most of them say that they don't experience, serious caste oppression in India. Most of them say that they prefer to, maintain marriage within their own communities. They're slightly endogamous, but they also respect the religious freedoms of others. So, I mean, the Pew study really presents the opposite picture of what these people are saying, and they're blaming it on the BJP, and they're conflating BJP and Hindutva ideology. And I mean, really, when you listen to their arguments, it's really an attack on the Indian government, which is democratically elected. So it's kind of like a regime change ideology, which it can't be acceptable. This is not what we do. This is not the Raj. The Raj is dead. It's time for the West to just let India be sovereign. They're an independent country and respect their autonomy.
Namaste everybody. Welcome to Citti Media. My name is Citti, your host. As the Dismantling Global Hindutva conference has come to a conclusion, we have many people who are speaking up against it, and it has caused a sentiment of unity among the Hindus. Joining us today is a very eminent guest from Australia, Sarah Gatesji. She goes by the name of Malini, which is her yoga name. And just a little introduction about her. She is a scholar who focuses on dharmic ecology and social justice. She's inspired by Kashmiri Shaivism and has traveled throughout India over the last 3 decades, where she's learned yoga and meditation and has a lot to tell us about Hinduphobia and a lot of other related issues. Sarahji, thank you so much for joining us.
Namaskar, thank you.
Namaste, how are you and how's everything in Australia?
Well, we're in the sort of calm before another storm. We have issues that have arisen throughout this Dismantling Global Hindutva conference period and the lead up to the period that will still need to be dealt with. So we're just biding our time and, checking our facts.
Right. No, it is indeed a difficult time that we're living through, especially because of the pandemic and whatever global events we've witnessed in the last few weeks. You're absolutely right. On that note, if I may ask you my first question. Now, you've been spreading awareness about rising crimes against Hindus and about the concept of Hinduphobia by itself. Now, what made you decide to do so?
Well, it was really just fate. One of my friends handed me a reference that said that Hinduphobia was cited in 1883, and we didn't know this. So I kept up with that study and produced a literary review showing that Hinduphobia was coined in 1866 by Sir Edward Sullivan, and it's been, pretty much understood through this whole period of time. It's nothing new. It wasn't made up by anybody recently, and it was actually older than the word Islamophobia, which people are saying we've, appropriated, and it's actually it's evidence of what Hinduphobia was and how it was understood throughout history, and we see the same kind of patterns of prejudice and bias against Hindus repeating today. So it's nothing new.
Right. So if that's the case, it's a very interesting fact that you're telling us. In fact, a lot of us are not aware about it. So if this was coined several decades ago, then why is it still not in use today? And the English language does not actually recognize the word Hinduphobia, but it does with Islamophobia.
It does. Through the study, we approached Oxford English Dictionary, and they've now put it in the dictionary. They had a lexicographer go through that history of word use, and they came up with the definition of dislike of or prejudice against Hinduism and Hindus. So that is the official definition, and it is recognised.
Right. That's extremely interesting. And if I may connect this with the Dismantling Global Hindutva conference, which you have very passionately followed, and you've had a lot of interesting observations. So can you share what you took away from many of the speakers from the conference?
Okay, so there's two themes. That is the defense of what they call academic freedom, and this sort of profiling of Hindus who dissent as being part of some, alleged extremism network. But their facts are flawed. They have a number of unsubstantiated claims that are refuted by evidence, particularly that the word Hinduphobia was recently coined, and that people use the word Hinduphobia just to deflect away from themselves being bigots and perpetrators, which is absolutely wrong. So that's the first point. Yeah.
And what other observations have you had from the conference?
Well, this issue of dissent is important because there's a conflation between, there are many conflations. They claim that they're scholars and activists, but most of the material is purely politically motivated and isn't substantiated by evidence. So this is more an activist activity than a scholarly activity, because they don't have references. None of it's subject to peer review. Some of the references they've used are just propaganda and news reports. You find that on the SUSAC website, that they lead you to, BuzzFeed, and they don't refer to like the terror database to prove that there's a supremacism movement that is a risk to, everybody in diaspora. It's just really, it's an activist movement that I don't think it's defensible by academic freedom, because there's no ethics. The methodology is flawed. And we have examples of Hindutva being called like an ideology, but it's evident that they can't separate an ideology from Hinduism. And there's references like in the Massey University white paper, which I stood up against, that said that the Vedic texts are supremacist texts. So it really is a flawed, proposal. What they're saying is flawed. They're trying to shield their bigotry behind, highfalutin jargon, and it's indefensible. These universities can't defend this because, in other countries, there's no freedom of speech. There's also, racial and religious vilification guidelines. And when academics produce material, they should not inflame the sentiments of anybody on those grounds. So I do think they're subject to some legal regulations and restrictions on what they call academic freedom, particularly outside of America.
Right, spot on, Saraji. And you introduced us to the Hinduism versus Hindutva debate, which supposedly are two different things according to these scholars. And if I have to quote one of the speakers from the conference, and she said, I emphasize without hesitation that Hindutva is inseparable from Hinduism, and arguments that Hindutva is not Hinduism are deeply dangerous and will not lead us to the future we want. Now, this seems to be a huge contradiction in what they actually claim. Now, they say that both are the same things, which means that their fight is not against the so-called Hindutva ideology. Their fight is against Hindus.
Well, they capture under their rubric of what they call supremacism, all kinds of ordinary activities that anybody who even goes to a yoga studio is going to be participating in. So we're not just talking about your, devout religious communities. We're talking about anybody who participates in any aspect at all of Sanatana Dharma.
Right. So they're targeting everyone is what you're saying.
Yeah, and I don't think people realize that quite yet, but this is not a new narrative. This has been going on for decades. If you go through the academic materials online, and it just hasn't been refuted or repudiated because people aren't paying attention. And this was a real wake-up call when I raised this issue of the white paper with the New Zealand community. They had no idea this was going on. And now Hindus feel unsafe in New Zealand. They're feeling stigmatized. They're feeling people are prejudiced against them. And it's just not, it's not Australian values, it's not New Zealand values. We should be allowed to express our culture and our religion and our faith without any fear of bias or prejudice.
What's happening in New Zealand, because in India we have a section of people who sort of fangirl over Jacinda Ardern, you know, so and the kind of feminism she emulates and the leadership that she represents. So what is actually happening in Australia and New Zealand? Because the reports that are coming right now is from America and Europe, and that is what our limitation, our understanding is up to. So could you tell us more about the crimes against Hindus in those regions?
From my studies, we see that there's, there's quite strong strictures and criteria around what people call hate crime, for example. So you can't really use hate crime, which is, acts against persons and temples, to repudiate that there is bias and prejudice, because it appears in the media, it appears in academia, it appears in films, on television, it appears in everyday comments on social media. There's plenty of Hinduphobia going on, and my survey shows that Hindus are feeling afraid, and they feel like there's no option for them to actually make reports or, bring awareness, because there's a very a broad lack of awareness about what Hinduphobia actually is. It's not just people bashing you or spitting on you on the streets. It's a whole psyche that's being aroused among the community, and I think Jacinda Ardern and our Prime Minister Scott Morrison, and I think, Narendra Modi ji, I think they would be highly, highly concerned about what this will lead to on the ground, because we've seen what happened after 9/11 in America, when anybody who looked like a person of color was stigmatized as a terrorist, and that's exactly what they're doing. It's going to affect everybody. It will capture people from Japan all the way across Southeast Asia, people from India, anybody who practices yoga. It's a broad net, and the people who are saying these things will be captured inside that net themselves. So it's really self-sacrificial.
Right. So this is a direct attack on India's soft power as well. One of the commentators, who's a professor of peace studies, I'm not going to take any names, made a remark saying that if their ideology, by there he means Hindutva ideology, is so old and so powerful, and above all, if Hinduphobia is actually true, why are they so nervous about a few unnamed academics holding an online conference in the United States?
They're not unnamed, so that's an error of fact. And if you go through the materials which they've produced and you check their facts, I would suggest, making a counterclaim about that, because these people are not unknown. They have a history of preparing narratives, and particularly on things that are really, dangerous issues to be poking their noses into, issues that are geopolitically volatile, that could lead to escalating tensions between Pakistan and India. We don't want a nuclear winter. And the studies showing that if you push and escalate that situation, that's the potential outcome. I think people who talk about peace, this professor talks about peace.
Absolutely.
We want peace. We want to de-escalate. We need to de-escalate tension. We need to de-escalate communalism. And if you look at the Pew study on India in 2021, you'll see that Indians, well, for a start, all of them identify with a caste, so you can't blame it on upper caste Hindus. All of them, all of the religions. Most of them say that they don't experience, serious caste oppression in India. Most of them say that they prefer to, maintain marriage within their own communities. They're slightly endogamous, but they also respect the religious freedoms of others. So, the Pew study really presents the opposite picture of what these people are saying, and they're blaming it on the BJP, and they're conflating BJP and Hindutva and Hindutva ideology. And really, when you listen to their arguments, it's really attack on the Indian government, which is democratically elected. So it's kind of like a regime change ideology, which it can't be acceptable. This is not what we do. This is not the Raj. The Raj is dead. It's time for the West to just let India be sovereign. They're an independent country, and respect their autonomy.
Right. Very strong comments coming from you. And I absolutely agree. This is a form of neo-colonialism that is being
Absolutely.
imposed on India. And I know that we are short on time, so I'm going to ask you my last question, which is also one of the quotes from the conference. And this is really funny because for a minute, everybody on Twitter thought this is satirical in a sense. And I personally thought somebody from The Onion, the satirical website, was sort of representing themselves at the conference and saying this, because the quote goes, "Unlike Christian fundamentalists, Hindu nationalists are not opposed to science. Rather, they strategically use rhetoric from both science and Hinduism, modernity and orthodoxy, Western and Eastern thought and philosophy to build a powerful and dangerous vision of India as a Hindu nation." I have
Sorry,
absolutely.
I've heard this before. I mean, you saw these type of narratives coming out, especially since the United Nations Day of Yoga, which obviously shocked a few people, that the whole world would be, absolutely enamored with this celebration on the solstice of yoga. I mean, we've all come together. It's an expression of unity, of harmony. Yoga is all about world peace. It's all about respect for one another, self-realization, awakening higher consciousness, bringing the world up and uplifting one another. And these people who claim that there's no place, for traditional knowledge in, the scientific community are really misguided. They need to go on to PubMed because Ayurveda, yoga, all kinds of traditional knowledge have been verified by clinical trials. Like
Yes.
they said that there was no double-blind clinical trials on Ayurveda. Really, they need to get with the times.
Right.
This stuff is being patented. There's all kinds of incredible treatments, but we know this from all kinds of traditional knowledge being appropriated by, neo-colonial powers. They take the ideas of the indigenous peoples from, South America, Australia, India. This is something that's been going on for a very long time. And
Right.
they use them in their patented products, and they make profit while the people who came up with the knowledge make none. They're participating in the enablement of the oppression of Indigenous peoples worldwide by this type of argument. I believe in complementary medicine. I believe that there are allied health potentials for yoga and natural medicine. I've used natural medicine all my life. I've used yoga all my life. And
Right.
I've hardly ever got sick. So it keeps your immune system, strong. And that's preventative medicine. So that's my
extremely
view.
heartening to know. That's very inspiring, Saraji. I mean, I wish more and more people read more about our culture and traditions and are inspired in the same way that you are. Well, for conclusion, if we have to conclude this session, what are your remarks, especially having observed a very hectic week of geopolitical events and a lot of other developments that have happened? How has this impacted you personally? What have you learned from this? And how do you think Hindus as a community have to go forward from here?
Well, working with the Australian and New Zealand Hindu community, we're formulating a strategic and documented, data-driven, evidence-based, experience-based social justice model to promote awareness of Hinduphobia among all aspects of our institutions, because people just don't know what it is, and they don't know what it is because there hasn't been enough study. There hasn't been enough data. So we're conducting surveys, and we'll be moving forward in that way. And I would recommend that all communities do surveys, because you don't know what's happening until you ask.
Right. Absolutely.
And so it leaves a gap, it leaves a void. And that's why they're saying that Hinduphobia doesn't exist in America. But that's because they've created their own, like they've tried to define Hinduphobia from their own very, politically motivated perspective in such a narrow category that it just doesn't reflect reality. So reality on the ground needs to be spoken.
Right.
Yep.
Absolutely, Saraji. We will be doing another long form talk this week, and I'm absolutely thrilled to hear more from you. So I'm pretty sure there'll be a lot that we and our viewers can learn from you. And let me just thank you for being in service of Dharma and I'm sure an entire civilization is indebted to you.
Let me thank you for giving me dharma and for bringing this to my life and in service to dharma for life.
Dharma is not ours to give, Sarajay, it's everybody. So I'm really glad that you've taken this path, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you so much. Blessings.
Thank you. Have a nice day. Namaste.
You too. Namaste.
And to all our viewers, please do like, share, and subscribe to Citti Media. This is Sharan Shetty, your host, signing off.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.